Hi guys, welcome to today's video. So in today's video we're going to be taking a look at some of the prep work and the work that we're going to be doing on this MX5 respray. So the two doors that are here are already been prepped. They're in the final primer. They've had a last quick sand down, so they're all done, ready for a clean down. This side of the shell has been done, so this wing, the door shut, the rear quarter and the back end has already been done. So what we're going to take a look at first is taking a look at the prep down this driver side of the car. We're going to be taking a look at the different stages that I'll go through to prep this for paint. Once we've had a look at the different stages that I'm going to go through to prep it for paint, we'll then go out, mix some paint up, and we'll get some paint on this. And we'll probably get a little bit of footage as well of the doors going back on. And then in part two, we'll follow along from that.
So for prep, we're starting off with a P400 on the DA. Now this has already been primed once, blocked out with a 240 all over, and then we've just put two very thin coats of primer over this just to seal everything up, ready for paint to go down. And my trick with this is to sand up to the edges but not sand over the edges. So you can see I'm being very careful there to sand up to the edges, and then I'll finish all the edges off around the outside by hand, because I want to limit the amount of rub throughs. The whole point that I've put this coat down is just to seal everything up and get everything nice and sealed and one uniform colour, because this neo green, I believe it is, that this Mazda's done in, it's not the best as far as coverage goes, even though it is a dark colour. Also, while we're starting off this video guys, 72.4% of you guys watching are still not subscribed. My mission for this year is to try and hit at least 50,000 subs, so if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button for me and hit the bell to be notified of when we've got a new upload. So now that prep bit has been done inside the door shuts and on the other side, we need to deal with the issue of the windscreen rubber. Now these windscreen rubbers on this Mazda are particularly stiff. Your average screen lifting tape won't cut it for these. So I've just got some 1.5mm core. It's basically like speaker wire and a filler spreader. I'll put the filler spreader under and use my finger to just run the speaker wire in. That'll lift this up just enough that we can get the paint underneath there, and when we pull the speaker wire out, we'll end up with a really nice clean edge. Now for masking it off, I'll just stretch a piece of tape along it, and one thing that I'm trying to make sure when I do this is I'm only leaving around about a 1 to 2mm overhang over the edge of the rubber, so we've got just enough to flap around the edge of this windscreen seal, so that when we do, it's not going to be touching the paint on the other side, and we can end up with a really nice clean finish, and the paint will go underneath there, because as you saw me showing me the spiller spreader, there's plenty of room underneath that rubber with it lifted up with that very small piece of wire to get the paint right underneath that gap.
Waiting and always hesitating, kryptonite desires set my heart afire.
So everything's now prepped. As you can see, we've got all the panel work prepped, we've prepped all the door shut, got all that rear quarter prepped as you've just seen in the video clip. We've masked out around this window lip and we've got all that prepped. Obviously now, with us doing this in the booth, we've got a lot of dust and a lot of mess. Now, I know for some of you guys that triggers you guys in the fact that I sand in the booth, but unfortunately we've got a small workshop, it's not massive. We've got 3 lads here, so there's 1 powder coating and there's 2 of us in the paint shop side. So we haven't really got room all the time to prep parts outside and then bring them in. But the trick to this and getting a nice clean job, and you've seen me do it in videos before, is just a bit of good housekeeping. So although we've done all this in the booth now, the main job now is we've got rid of all the stuff out of the booth. We're gonna have a good brush up, have a big blowout. We're gonna turn the booth on, get the fans running while we do it, and that's gonna suck all the excess dust out, and we're gonna clean everything down and get it all ready for paint.
So all the boo's been cleaned out now. I have gone round with a tiny little bit of wet on wet and just coloured up like the window pillar and a few tiny little rub throughs on the edges. As you can see now, the floor's nice and clean, the car's nice and clean, everything's been tack ragged, panel wiped off, so it's time to start shooting this direct gloss down. Now I will leave the colour code and the colour name in the description for you guys, and for this I've decided to try out my Segola 4600 Extreme Aqua. It's got a 1.2 XL setup in it. And as I just said, it's got the Aqua air cap on it. I am actually thinking of giving this 1.2 XL setup a little bit of a whirl in my DVR Clear, because I don't know why, but at the minute I'm just quite liking this 1.2 XL setup. It's a really nice setup. So I thought I'd give it a little bit of a bash on this one for this green 2K gloss. Now what we're going to be doing for this is we're going to be going for 3 coats of this gloss, but we're not going too heavy for the very first coat. The first coat I'm going to be concentrating more on all these hard to reach areas. I'm going to spend a lot more time making sure that like inside those door shuts, under the edges and underneath the sills and stuff like this, because we've welded new sills in the back end of here, so we want everything to be nice and coloured and uniform and even when it's done. And as I said, although this does look like quite a dark colour, it is actually quite poor for coverage. If you mix it a little bit too weak or put a little bit too much thinners in it, or you don't quite get a real nice sort of like tight overlap on your coats after your first coat, then it can quite easily end up quite patchy, this colour, and quite see-through. So for the first coat I'm just going nice and steady. I'm just concentrating more on the coverage for this colour on the first coat. So inside areas like this I'm going to spend a lot of time, more than I normally would with your average colour, just making sure that all the insides and all the hinges and all around these brackets and everything are all nicely coloured up before I start moving on. Now for the main coat I'm going to be using a 50% overlap for this first coat, and I'm only about 1.5 turns out on the fluid. I'm running this, I think I ended up at about 1.6 to 1.8 bar. It does put it down really nice at that, and you'll probably see towards a little bit later in the video just how well it goes down. And then once I've got this first careful coat down, on the second and third coat, now the second coat I've not included in the footage because it would make the video too long, but you will see in the third coat my overlap is a lot tighter. We're running around about, I would say, a 70% overlap as opposed to a 50% overlap, because I want it nice and heavy and nice and wet. And once this initial first coat's gone down, on the next coat I turned it out half a turn, and then on the final coat I turned it out another half a turn again on the fluid, because each time we put a coat on we've got obviously that nice sticky tacky layer, so we can put down consecutive coats a little bit wetter than you can do your first coat, because this first coat you're almost going on to like a dry smooth surface, so going too wet at this stage is going to be a real big problem. Going a little bit wetter as we move on and we've got that tackiness to stick to is going to be less and less of a problem. And as a painter, that does enable me to go that little bit wetter. Now for the booth temperature on this day, I had the booth set to about 25 degrees. Again, that gives me a nice quick flash off on the paint and allows me to lay it that little bit wetter and that little bit smoother and get that nice overall finish. In between each coat, I gave it a good 10 to 15 minutes. Well, I went out, got a bottle of water and mixed up the next lot of paint for the next coat, just to let it flash off and tack off really well before I came in with the next coat. Because with something like direct gloss, and I was actually speaking to a guy on the comments about this the other day, he asked me on the T5 what direct gloss we use. The direct gloss that we use is the Capsy direct gloss, and the problem with a lot of direct gloss colours is they can be a bit temperamental to solvent pop, or just really pulling back and having a lot of issues if you overload them. I have found that personally this one I can put 3 coats on as long as I give it that 10 to 15 minute flash off, and I don't get barely any dime back whatsoever, and as long as I don't rush the flash off time, I'll get no solvent pop or anything on it. It'll look just as nice when it comes off bake as it did when I painted it, which obviously is what I am after when I am painting a vehicle. So this is the third and final coat now on this MX5, and as you can see, the first two coats have gone down really nice. We've got everything covered, so no, everything's completely covered. So on this coat I don't need to be quite as careful because I know I've got full coverage everywhere. As I said at the start, we're now a full turn out further on the fluid than we were in the first coat. The paint still mixed the same. It's still 2-to-1 with hardener, and I've got 10% thinners in there just to help with a little bit of flow out. But on this coat, as far as the actual fluid goes, I'm not really hanging around, and if you watch carefully, you will see on this I've got a much tighter overlap than I did on the first coat. That's going to give me a lot more material in the same area, going at the same speed, and also give me that nice wet flat finish that I'm looking for. Because with this being a full repaint, we always give our repaints a full polish regardless of how nice they come off the gun. That's just what we do at our shop. I like to go that extra little bit to make the car that extra little bit special over what your average shop would do, I guess. And the smoother, the nicer the finish that I have got to work with, then obviously the easier that quick flat and polish will be. And on a car this big, you know, there's not a lot of polishing on it anyway, because the whole bottom end of this car is obviously that textured finish. So I've only got like the top, it's not barely even half the car to polish. So it'll be a nice quick flat and polish on this once it's come off bake. Now, one thing that I will say on the polishing side is that for me anyway, I know a lot of guys like to polish them almost straight away. If it's a job like this, say that's had 3 coats, or it's one of the higher end jobs that we did like Lewis's camper van or something like that, then I like to normally try and leave them at least sort of 3 to 4, if not 5 days once the shell's been painted, while I get all the rest of the parts painted up before I actually flat and polish them. That way I can make sure everything is absolutely rock hard, everything's aired through really well, so that when I come round to flat and polish it, I've got no risk of stuff dying back or having any problems with any polishing work or anything like that down the line. Just gives me that little bit of a safety net. Obviously, it means that the paint's going to be a little bit harder to polish up and to flat up. But for me, it just ends up, you know, there's a lot less chance of it coming back with any dying back from the polishing stage being rushed as soon as it's come off bake. So the first thing that we did was, when this came off bake, was get it all unmasked, which I do have the footage coming up of that shortly, and also got the doors fitted and hung and got those gapped, so that once, say like the bonnet and the boot are done the next day, then everything's ready to bolt back on and we can gap them all up, and then I'll polish the shell before we rebuild any of the shell. So as you can probably tell by this footage here, this has come out really nice. It's really nice and clean. There's not many nibs in this at all, bearing in mind obviously we sanded this in the booth. It's really nice and clean, it's really nice and flat. It's got a really nice wet finish to it all over it. It's going to be such an easy polish this to make this look absolutely spot on. I mean, you can see just by the reflection in it just how nice this gloss has gone down with this 1.2 XL setup. And I have to say, it is a setup that I am enjoying. So we have got a little bit of footage of the unmasking stage and also hanging the doors and the bits and pieces. And then we're going to follow on from this footage straight into part 2 next week and carry on from where we've left off in this video.